The scream did not rise. It exploded. It ripped through the night so suddenly that even the insects went silent. Dogs broke loose from their chains. Somewhere, a child woke crying before their mother could reach them. The sound came from the last hut at the eastern edge of Umuada, where the trees pressed closest to the village and the forest breathed heavier. By the time the first torch flared alive, the man was already on his knees. His name was Ikenna, a farmer, quiet, the kind of man people forgot to greet because he never caused trouble. His fingers clawed into the earth floor as if he were trying to pull himself awake. His mouth opened again, but this time no sound came out, only a violent shudder that traveled through his whole body. Someone shouted his name. Someone else shouted for water. Ikenna's eyes were open, too open. They stared at nothing, glassy and unblinking, as his chest hitched once, then failed to rise again. By the time the elders arrived, the hut was already crowded with torches, shadows jumping wildly across the walls. Ikenna lay still, and the night, which had felt ordinary moments earlier, now felt wrong. By morning, the village had already begun to change the story. Some said he had been dragged halfway into the spirit world and failed to return. Others whispered that something had followed him from the forest after sunset. A woman swore she heard a second voice inside the hut, low and patient, calling his name. No one agreed on what they had seen, but everyone agreed on one thing. That scream had not been human. The second death came sooner. It happened the following night, before fear had time to settle properly into caution. This time, it was Sadiq, a trader known for staying awake late, counting cowries by lantern light. People said he was too clever for his own good, that he trusted numbers more than warnings. He was found slumped against his doorway just before dawn, eyes wide, lips blue, fingers curled as if he had tried to grip something invisible. No screams this time. That was worse. By sunrise, people were standing in small clusters, talking in low voices, their eyes never resting on one place for too long. Mothers pulled children closer. Men who normally left early for the fields lingered near their huts, pretending to fix tools that didn't need fixing. And beneath it all, a new behavior sprayed quietly. People were afraid to close their eyes. The elders met that night. They gathered around the old fire pit, faces lined deep with unease, the flames painting their expressions in restless orange. No one sat comfortably. Every sound from the forest made heads turn. It was Mama Ejike who spoke first. "This is not ordinary," she said, her voice thin but steady. "The night has been disturbed." Others nodded, some muttered prayers under their breath. Then someone mentioned a detail that had gone unnoticed before. Both men slept shortly before they died. The fire cracked loudly as if reacting. Silence followed. "What are you saying?" one elder asked. Mama Ejuke did not answer immediately. She stared into the fire, then finally lifted her head. "We must not sleep." The words settled heavily. At first, it sounded foolish, impossible. Even the forest needed rest. But fear has a way of shrinking reason. Before dawn, the drums were brought out. They were not festival drums. They were the old ones, scarred, deep-voiced, usually left untouched except during dire moments. When the first beat landed, it felt less like sound and more like pressure, pushing into the chest. The rhythm was slow, relentless. The message was clear without being spoken. Stay awake. By the third night, exhaustion had begun its quiet work. People swayed where they stood. Conversations drifted into arguments without anyone remembering how they started. A young boy burst into tears because he was certain the moon was following him. The drums did not stop. Each beat crushed the silence just enough to keep sleep at bay, but not enough to offer comfort. The sound crawled into bones, into thoughts, into dreams that never fully formed. Some people tied ropes around their waists and had others tug them whenever their heads dipped. Others chewed bitter kola until their tongues burned. A few slapped themselves hard enough to leave marks. And still, someone collapsed near the well just before dawn. He lived, barely. It was during that fourth night that Nwafo returned. He came quietly, as he always did, slipping into the village with a hunter's step and a healer's eyes. He had been gone for years, traveling between settlements, learning plants, patterns, listening more than speaking. He noticed things immediately. The way people flinched at small sounds, the way the well was crowded long after sunset, the way no one drank deeply, only enough to wet the throat, as if afraid of wanting more. He asked no questions at first. He watched. When a woman began shouting that something was crawling under her skin, 2 men grabbed her arms before she could run into the forest. She fought them with a strength born of panic, screaming that she could hear her dead mother calling her to lie down. Another man accused his neighbor of whispering curses into the drums. A circle formed, voices rose, someone lifted a stick. The elder stepped in just in time. But the damage had been done. Fear had turned inward. That night, the drums beat harder. And somewhere, just before dawn, another scream started to rise, then cut off.
By the 5th night, the village no longer waited for darkness. People began preparing for nightfall while the sun was still high, fetching water early, dragging stools into open spaces, gathering anything that might keep them upright once the drums began. Sleep had become a threat, night an enemy that advanced no matter what anyone did. The drums started before the moon fully rose. Their rhythm had changed, faster now, sharper, as if whoever beat them was afraid of slowing down. Nwafo stood near the edge of the square, leaning on his staff, watching how people moved. No one walked alone anymore. Even the strongest men stayed within arm's reach of someone else. A shared fear was safer than a private one. Mama Ejike sat close to the drums, her eyes half closed, lips moving silently. Ash marked her forehead. A small leather pouch hung at her chest, bouncing lightly with each beat. She said, her voice cutting through the drumbeat. The village has been weighed, and it is heavy. People turned toward her at once. There is a stain among us, something unresolved, something buried that refuses to stay quiet. Nwafo watched the crowd lean in. Fear likes explanations, even when they hurt. The night feeds on weakness, and sleep opens the door. A murmur rolled through the people. Someone asked what must be done. Mama Ejike did not answer immediately. She reached into her pouch and scattered a pinch of white powder into the fire. The flames hissed, flaring briefly. Those who carry darkness must be revealed, or the night will keep choosing for us. The first accusation came less than an hour later. A man staggered forward, pointing at a woman sitting alone near the well. His voice shook as he spoke her name, claiming she had been watching sleepers too closely, that her eyes never closed, and she smiled when the drums grew louder. The woman stood slowly. Her face was hollow with exhaustion. Her hands trembled. I am afraid like all of you. I have not slept. But fear does not listen well. Voices rose. Others added small details, looks they remembered, words they might have heard. Each accusation fed the next. Nwafo stepped forward. Enough, he said. The single word cut through the noise more cleanly than shouting ever could. People turned toward him, surprised. Some recognized him, others only saw a stranger interrupting their relief at finally having someone to blame. She has done nothing, and blaming her will not keep you alive. A silence followed. Not agreement, evaluation. Mama Ejike's gaze rested on him, sharp and measuring. You speak with confidence, but the night has already spoken louder. Before Mwafo could answer, a scream tore through the village, again. They found the man slumped near the edge of the square, not far from where the drums were beating. He had not even made it back to his hut. His body was twisted unnaturally, as though he had fallen while fighting something no one else could see. His lips were parted, teeth clenched so tightly his jaw looked ready to crack. Someone whispered that he must have dozed off standing. Someone else crossed themselves and stepped back. This time, no one waited for morning. The elders declared it openly. No one was allowed to sleep. Not in huts, not sitting, not leaning. Anyone caught sleeping would be restrained, for their own safety, they said. The drums were moved closer to the center of the village, louder, constant. Exhaustion began to reshape people. Mwafo saw it in the way men forgot simple tasks, in the way tempers flared without warning, in the way people laughed at the wrong moments, then looked frightened by their own laughter. Near dawn, a boy collapsed and did not wake for several terrifying moments. When his eyes finally fluttered open, his screams woke half the village. He clutched at his chest, sobbing that something had been sitting on him, pressing him down, whispering. Mama Ejike called it a sign. The night is testing us, she said. Those who fall are being weighed. Nwafo said nothing. He had knelt beside the boy, while others argued. He had noticed the smell on his breath, faint, bitter, familiar. Later, when the boy was taken away, Nwafo walked to the well. He crouched and lowered his gourd slowly. The water reflected his face, distorted by ripples. He hesitated. Then he stopped. He straightened, cocked the gourd, and walked away without drinking. By the sixth night, people were no longer just afraid. They were angry. Angry at the drums, angry at the elders, angry at anyone who seemed less tired than they felt. A man grabbed another by the collar, accusing him of pretending to stay awake. A woman slapped her sister for closing her eyes too long. Mama Ejike announced a cleansing ritual at sunset. This time, no one argued. They gathered near the shrine, hollow-eyed and desperate. Smoke filled the air. Chants rose, uneven and strained. Nwafo watched from the edge. He noticed who attended eagerly and who stayed away. Okoro, the water keeper, was not there. He was at the well, as always. That night, someone tried to sleep in secret. They dragged him out before dawn. He was alive, but whatever he had seen had stripped something out of him. As the sun rose weakly over Umuada, Nwafo stood alone near the well again, staring down into the water. The drums finally fell silent, and in the sudden quiet, he understood something that made his chest tighten. The knout was not choosing at random, and the village was helping it.
By the seventh night, Umuada had forgotten what rest felt like. People moved as if underwater, slow and unsteady, their thoughts dragging behind their bodies. Faces were hollow, eyes sunken and rimmed with red. Some whispered to themselves without realizing it. Others stared too long at nothing, as if afraid to look away. The drums no longer felt like protection. They felt like punishment. Nwafo stayed awake easily now. Fear sharpened him. It always had. While others fought their bodies, his mind remained alert, collecting details most people no longer had the strength to notice. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. Every death followed the same quiet rhythm. Evening, water, restlessness, collapse. The well stood at the center of it all, surrounded by cracked earth and deep footprints pressed into the soil by desperate feet. Long before nightfall, villagers gathered there, feeling gods again and again, afraid of thirst, afraid of running out, afraid of the wrong things. Uwafo had stopped drinking from the well 2 nights earlier. Since then, the pressure on his chest at night had faded. The strange heaviness that crept into his limbs whenever the drums began had loosened its grip. Others were not as fortunate. Near dawn, a man crumpled beside the path leading from the well, his body folded inward as though something had crushed him from the inside. When the sun rose, he was already gone. This time, no one screamed. They were too tired. As the deaths continued, the elders tightened their control. People were forced to remain in open spaces where exhaustion was impossible to hide. Those whose eyes lingered too long were shaken violently, dragged back to their feet, accused of inviting the night in. The village fed on itself. Nwafo watched fear turn neighbors into wardens. Mothers slapped their children awake. Friends argued over who had slept longer. Any sign of calm was treated with suspicion. Mama Ejike moved through it all like a shadow, her presence heavy, unquestioned. Rituals multiplied. Ash smeared across doorways, charms tied to wrists, smoke thickened the air until breathing itself felt like effort. Still, people kept dying. On the 8th night, Nwafo went to the well after sunset. The village was gathered elsewhere, bound to the drums, eyes fixed on one another. The well was almost empty, lit only by a single dying torch. Okoro stood there alone. He always did. His movements were steady, unhurried. He lowered a bucket, drew water, and poured it carefully into waiting gourds arranged in a neat line. His face showed no exhaustion, no tremor, no urgency. The contrast was unsettling. Nwafo watched from the shadows. He saw Okoro reach into a cloth pouch at his waist and crush something between his fingers before letting it fall into the bucket. The motion was small, practiced, as familiar as breath. When the water settled, Okoro lifted the bucket and continued his walk. Nwafo did not step forward. Not yet. The truth once seen was impossible to unsee. The plant Okoro used was rare but known. Nwafo learnt of it years ago in a distant settlement where it was used sparingly and with care. In small amounts, it sharpened dreams. In water, left overnight, it became something entirely else. It turned sleep into a trap. It pressed down on the chest, slowed the heart, locked the body, while the mind panicked itself to death. Used this way, it was invisible. Used this way, it was patient. The memory surfaced like a wound. Years earlier, before Nwafo had left the village, fire had torn through a cluster of huts near the forest edge. Accusations had spread faster than truth. Fear demanded an offering. Okoro's family was inside. The elders called it justice. The village called it necessary. Okoro was not there to scream. He had returned to silence on the 9th night, Noafo confronted him. There was no shouting, no crowd, no struggle. Only the well, the dark water, and the weight of everything that had been avoided for too long. Okoro did not deny what he had done. He did not justify it. He simply continued his work, slower now, more deliberate, as if finishing something he had started long ago. By morning, the drums stopped. The water from the well was untouched. People slept where they collapsed, bodies giving in all at once, scattered across the village like the aftermath of a storm. Some slept for hours, others never fully rested, waking often, gasping, unsure if it was safe to close their eyes. No one died that night. When the sun climbed higher, Okoro was gone. No footprints led away from the well. No one saw him leave. The forest took him back, without sound. The elders ordered the well sealed. A new one was dug farther from the village center, deeper, safer. The old well was left to rot, its rope cut, its stones abandoned. Umuada slept again, but not easily. People woke from dreams they could not explain. Some refused to drink water unless they saw it drawn fresh. Others could no longer sleep indoors. The drums were never played again. And in the quiet that followed, the village carried something heavier than fear. The knowledge that the night had not been their enemy. It had been their mirror.